Order, order. So we'll resume with our second panel for this afternoon. Gentlemen, would you like to introduce yourselves? Perhaps we'll start with you, Mr. Taylor.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Jim Taylor. I am the head of OPAL, which is a national policing team for serious and organised acquisitive crime.
Andrew Goodacre, I'm Chief Executive for the British Independent Retailers Association, representing 4,500 members, everything from a pet shop to department store, but not grocery.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Ed Woodall. I'm Chief Executive of the Association of Convenience Stores. We represent the UK's 50,000 convenience retailers.
Thank you very much. And we'll start questioning with Ben Maguire.
Thanks, Sharon. Thanks for coming in to speak to us today. First question to all of you is, to what extent retail crime is linked to serious organised crime?
We'll start, perhaps, Mr. Woodall.
Thanks. So retail crime is a huge issue for retailers in terms of shop theft, violence and abuse, antisocial behaviour against staff. I think the link to organised crime happens on a number of different levels depending on how you want to define organised crime. I think at the very highest level there's sort of burglaries and robberies of sites that are targeting cash and tobacco, and that might look like targeting ATM machines, cash machines, or gangs that are targeting tobacco to sell on. And they'll be very organised, they'll work across different police force areas, and of course they're stealing the tobacco in particular to redistribute across different channels. And that will happen across different force areas. So I think that's the sort of highest level organised, and it does enough damage to the store to stop them sort of trading in their neighbourhood and community, so a very, very visible impact. Then I think when you shift down to organised criminality at the shop theft level, I think there's sort of two approaches. There are typically the shop theft that we see is committed by people that have addiction issues, housing issues, that will be going from store to store to store, stealing goods in order to resell it. But that would be very, very localised. You see a sort of 2 to 3 person crime wave. It's quite likely that those individuals are known to the police, known to the retailer, and known to the community, and they operate. But that's a very much localised level. And then I think there's a bit in the middle, which is organised shop theft, which is a bit more like organised looting, where you'll have literally shelves cleared of meat, of alcohol, of cheese, any high-value good, on the basis that they're stealing to order, to then for that product to be resold and disposed in different channels, whether that be dodgy shops that we've talked about in the previous panel, whether that be online, or whether that be through their own networks individually. So of the highest volume crime, there's a very clear connection with organised criminality.
Just building on what Ed was saying, I think we have 3 types of crime. Someone said, I think we have retail abuse, staff abuse, and that's the consumers. So that's not really organised as such, but actually then there's the perpetrators of shop theft. We've seen this surge in the level of shop theft for the last 3 years, now 4 years, and I think generally acceptance that the surge is coming because people have become more organised. Now, whether that's serious organised crime or people have become more aware of the opportunity that stealing from shops presents, hard to say, but it's certainly seen behind it, and I think largely we think organised crime is behind that. I guess the 2 other areas that concern us, the illicit shops, illegitimate shops, definitely more organised, and we're seeing an increased threat from cyber, and cybercrime tends to be that little bit more organised again in that respect. So there's no doubt that retail sector is very challenged by organised crime at different levels.
It's probably fair to say, until probably 2 years ago, policing understanding of organised retail crime was very thin. Reason being is we know that retail crime was very much underreported, and local forces weren't making the link between what's happening locally and then tracking those offenders nationally, which of course is what Ed has talked about there. The OPAL hosts the Organised Retail Crime Intelligence Team, which was put in place initially as a result of the Pegasus partnership. It's a public-private partnership with the retailers. That gave us an opportunity then to have a kind of foot on the ball moment as to, what is organised retail crime, what does it look like? We know, obviously, underreporting to police, if we're only seeing 20% of the crimes, then we're not seeing 100% of the picture. And actually, the crime data and incident data that sits in with retailers not being reported to policing was equally as important as what is being reported. In the last couple of years, the team has become very much more adept at understanding what organised retail crime looks like. For the purposes of the OPAL definition, was high-impact commercial burglary or robbery committed by the same high-harm individual or a group across two or more police areas with sophistication and organised methodologies. And of those, we know that there were 550,000 reported incidents to policing in 2025. Of those incidents, 170,000 demonstrated those qualities. So we felt that there was probably around a 30 to 35% kind of coverage of organised retail crime.
Excellent. And you mentioned there that obviously the reporting of crimes has changed in recent years. Have you seen any major sort of changes in trends or shifts over the last 10 years in these types of crimes? Particularly, I'm thinking, given the questions we had for the last panel, in the rise of online retail.
Probably, I can answer that in the last couple of years that we've been looking at it. We've been pushing really hard. National Business Crime Centre, who is obviously sits alongside us, have been working really hard with retailers to make sure that they tell policing so that we understand it. We've provided a capability now where retailers can send directly their data into OPAL. And whilst that may not always be recorded, it is crime and incident, so at least allows us to make those links. So we have seen obviously an increase, which everyone would expect, but equally we were asking for that increase as well because it's important that we understand the problem.
Great, thanks for that. And I was keen to ask as well the impact of this type of retail crime on local communities, and if I may, given your background with Wiltshire Police and experience in the southwest, particularly rural communities, because without getting political, obviously there's less density of policing in rural towns and villages than there are somewhere like streets of Westminster, so I'd be quite keen to hear your experiences and reflections of that as well.
Yeah, of course. So I've been involved in serious and organised crime investigation for the majority of my policing career, and what I can tell you is that it is local to regional to national to global, and that's the reality. So, in a small county force like Wiltshire, for instance, whilst the volume may not be the same as the Metropolitan Police, the impact on local communities is significantly felt. So a small shop, the type that Ed would represent, would have a significant impact on, say, a £10,000 tobacco theft. Potentially that could put them out of business. Whereas a multinational may be able to, accept that as part of their loss. Equally damaging, but not as significant to someone's livelihood.
And what happens to the goods that are stolen from shops generally? You mentioned some of them are stolen to order. Is there any other destination for those goods, or?
I think what our members tell us is that, car boot sales often get mentioned, but I think the bigger opportunity is, and one of the reasons that's driven the growth of the crime, is it's far easier to dispose of the goods through many channels, online channels especially. There must be 50 marketplaces. You could sell an item as pre-loved when it's pre-stolen, and I'm not blaming the customers for buying it because it looks a bargain. Why wouldn't you? But when you see some online marketplaces actually having sections on labels still intact as an item to be sold, of clothing, for instance, then you're asking yourself, why is the label still intact? Because if you didn't like the item, you thought you would take it back to the store where you bought it from. So I think there is growing evidence, in my view, that online marketplaces, not knowingly, I think they become victims as well by the organised criminals, are being used as a very efficient way of disposing of a wider range of goods, which is why I think a wider range of businesses, nearly every business feels a target on the high street, and that's part of the problem.
There's no specific type of goods. It could be clothing. You mentioned
it varies.
High-end food and drink.
Ed will talk about chocolate, I'm sure, because that's been an issue for them. Toys. If I say jelly cats, then you'll probably know, but jelly cat toys. One of our member directors has had to stop selling them because he was losing more than he was selling. There's demand is there. Customers want to buy them, but there's more customers want to steal them and then sell them online. And I think that damages communities, obviously, because we're talking about small shops that service communities, and they're not often. Some of these shops will be post offices. Some of these businesses will be service businesses, and probably the only one offering those services within a 5 mile, 10 mile radius. And I think that's a real challenge for rural communities, because if you lose these businesses because they can't make it work financially, and that's not just theft, there's other reasons around that, then I think communities will suffer as a result.
Great.
Margaret Mullane.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I agree with Mr. Woodall on the kind of two different types of crime where local people that are affected by drugs are going in and feeding their habit. The police come and arrest them, the courts let them out the same day, so the shops are dealing with that. But I would argue, following on from Ben's statement he made, that like my seat's in East London and the police are often abstracted and are not around. So I would argue that not on the serious crime aspect, but on the low-level crime, because the police aren't there in the main at times when they're needed, then the serious crime then thinks, great, I'm working with one of the shops at the moment that because of their willingness not to act is attracting a terrible element into the area, and the police aren't there, so it just grows and grows. So I don't think that's been addressed by anything that's said this afternoon. I don't know, as OPAL, what you think of that, because I say to them, why don't you report? And they say because nobody's really interested, and the patterns and the kind of following it up just doesn't happen.
I think you're right in the sense that there is a real sense, if you talk to retailers, that they've lost confidence in the reporting mechanisms, both in the sense of a feedback loop that you're not expecting police to attend on every occasion, but you're understanding that has gone into the system, we can join the dots. And I think what we're missing is a big section in the middle of the crime. So we've got obviously Jim and OPAL and Operation Pegasus doing a great job for travelling criminals, but for those prolific offenders that go from store to store to store, we are not joining the dots at an operational policing level to address it. And I think one of the challenges for us as retailers is how can we share that information and report better. And I think at the minute the challenge is that the systems are not as streamlined for us to be able to report that. So I think our request into policing is how do we streamline the system so we can get our data in so that you can enact on it. Because there's a huge gap. I mean, we estimate in our data there's 5.8 million shop theft offences in the convenience sector alone. Policing England and Wales say 500,000. So we are miles apart. Yeah. And I think that's a big challenge for us to overcome, because if you do get people reporting, we'll join the dots where you can then identify the organised crime.
Thank you. Paul Kohler.
How are shops addressing this issue? How are they changing what they're doing to address this issue?
Yeah, they are investing significantly in stores to make them safer, to make them more secure. So we invest about £300 million a year across the convenience sector, which is about £6,000 per site. And I think I'd say there's sort of two ways in which those investments have come. First of all, it's about protecting colleagues, because people that are organised criminals stealing to order know that if they use violence and abuse and aggression towards staff, they will get away. So they'll use that tactically in store. So we had to make sure we're protecting colleagues first. So the first wave of investment has been around making colleagues feel connected. So headsets, body-worn cameras, remotely monitored CCTV will be a regular feature of convenience stores, but any stores that you go into now on the high street to keep people safe. I think now what we're seeing investment patterns change is around product protection as well. So to prevent the clearing of shelves, we're having more sort of shelf edge risers, so you can take one product at a time as opposed to taking them out. We're seeing more extreme things with people putting products in boxes, so meat, and also for alcohol, fridges where you have to press a bell in order to get the staff to come and serve you to open up. So the retailers are deploying those tactics to obviously keep their colleagues safe and the store safe. And it's really valued by customers. So we sort of poll them and say, how do you feel about these measures being in store? And actually, when they see retailers are investing in these measures, it does make them feel safer in the store. So we're absolutely trying to do that. I think the missing bit for us is the point we were just making, which is around reporting. If we really want to identify the organised criminals that probably account for 80% of the volume of shop theft crime in stores, we have to be able to join the dots and identify them.
We asked that question to our members in our last survey a few weeks ago. And in some ways, the retail crime theft is being, for most of our members are non-essential goods sellers. You know, the gift shops, their homeware stores, their hardware stores, bike shops, etc. And traditionally, a lot of the retail theft has been focused on more essential items like food, alcohol, cigarettes, those kind of in-demand items. So you could argue that they're playing catch-up a little bit in the shop owners in our sectors. The changes they've made, I've been around extra CCTV. The larger places are using body cams and walkie-talkies. Dummy products, you see shelves of dummy products. Health stores selling vitamins and those sort of items are putting dummy products out. To combat the shelf sweeping that Ed was referring to, and putting a lot more of the higher value items either in locked cases, which a member of staff has to open, or behind the counter. Now, I hear what Ed's saying, that customers want to be safe, and that's true enough. But there has to be a balance when you are out in a way using discretionary spend. You're looking for that better experience to spend the money. And what our members are telling us in the last survey is that they're fearful of making the shopping experience less enjoyable, because you can't touch and feel everything you may want to touch and feel. And that's a concern for those type of sellers who require that kind of more sensory purchase, for want of a better phrase.
I must be careful with this question. Over the decades or so, though, haven't you made it far easier to steal from shops? Be it self-service tills?
You'll find very few. I can't think of one member who does self-service tills.
No.
Oh,
sorry,
yeah.
Not to you, Andrew.
Yeah.
More to you, Edward. I was in a shop last night with my wife. We could find the door. We couldn't find where to pay. That was someone hidden somewhere in the back. And it was so easy to steal from the bigger retailers. Haven't you made it? I know in the last couple of years, there's security guards around suddenly, but wasn't the trend for a long while making it very, very easy, just assuming people would play by the rules?
There's bigger investment in self-service tills as the retailing model changes, but the monitoring of those around CCTV, the ability to steal from those is still difficult. If anything, it's harder. It's almost like you have to go through more steps to steal through a self-service checkout.
You don't see a figure of authority. You don't have to. When there's a human being at a till, there's a figure of authority there. With the self-service till, you can walk around my local supermarket and not see a figure of authority at any point. I'm just wondering whether the psychology has caused you problems. I know, I can imagine why it works in a business model, less staff to employ, but actually, are you not sending subliminal messages out there that it's a free-for-all?
I guess it might give an opportunity for the opportunists to steal, not the committed perpetrators, because the reality is the people who steal most of the items go nowhere near a till, self-service or manned. They're just in and out. And the till location, the type of till it is, will not prevent them because they go nowhere near it. Well, I think what you're talking about is, are you giving a sense of it? You're making that the whole value of your goods, and whether it gets stolen or not, you're giving a different perception.
Is that a subliminal message?
Possible,
I just worry
possible,
about.
But I'm not sure there's such a link with it, in fairness. I mean, as I was saying, our members, I can't think of one shop I've not been in them all, that has a self-service till, because to our members, the counter and bringing stuff to the counter is your greatest protection, possibly, in that respect.
And there's also more features around the store, so you will have now gated entries into stores that you wouldn't have, so you have one-way systems getting in and out. That includes on self-service checkouts in stores that see the highest level of theft. You would have to scan a receipt in order to get out for the barriers to open. But in the context of this, organised criminality, they are not going through the self-service checkout. They are clearing shelves, they're going straight out the door, they know what they're doing, they're not going through that route.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Margaret Mullane.
What do you think the effect of the new offence of assaulting a retail worker on businesses? Do you think it will be a deterrent, so people will be less likely to assault some poor worker?
I really hope so. I think it's about we have to keep communicating to everyone that there are tougher penalties for attacks on shop workers and make that very clear, and we want to see the courts absolutely following through on that because for a long time the evidence is clear that shop workers are at a point of vulnerability because they are there at the front line essentially enforcing the law. If you're in a convenience store, you have to age check people, that's a big flashpoint. You have to deal with shop thieves, that's a big flashpoint. Or you have to refuse to serve people who are intoxicated. So if they're enforcing the law, they need those protections. So absolutely, we want to make sure we're communicating. I would say it's very early days yet here because we've only just had the bill passed. We're still waiting for implementation of parts of it. But the suggestion and evidence in Scotland suggests that it will drive more offences, tougher offences, and hopefully courts will back that up.
Do you think need anything else as well to protect them?
I think the criminal behaviour orders area is really, really interesting. And again, all of this comes back to, do we have the policing resource to back up the new measures that we do? So an example from one of my members, that James Convenience Retail, they operate a store in Derby bus station. They put in profit protection officers because they had such a high level of theft. And within a week, they'd identified 34 different shop thieves operating out of that store, one of which had a criminal behaviour order. So what you do, the criminal behaviour order, is you call the police and say they have a criminal behaviour order. Now, police were then not able to respond and say, okay, well, we're going to make sure that they don't come back in, we're going to come in, arrest them, take them in. So I think making sure that for these prolific offenders that are connected with organised crime that will use violence and abuse as a tactic when they're stealing, we have to be able to target them. And to do that, I think you need to use criminal behaviour orders, banning letters, things that stop them from coming back in.
Building on that, I would say as well, because the whole sector pushed for the crime to be recognised. Yep. Unions as well, and it's a real combined effort. CBOs, Ed's right, CBOs are very important. I think the bill also talks about respect orders, and we're not hearing so much about those at the moment, but hopefully they will follow through, because they really do follow up the fact it's not just about theft, it's not just about physical abuse, but there's verbal abuse involved as well.
From a serious and organised crime point of view, obviously Ed and Andrew talking about the whole scope and actually some of that local prolific offending, but actually from a serious and organised crime point of view, we're now taking a slightly different stance with the groups we're identifying. Whereas before, if we're arresting and putting individuals in front of the court for shop theft, likely end up in a magistrate's court and end up with a minimal sentence, if at all. Well, actually now what we're doing is, the work that we're doing within OPAL is understanding the totality of the crime, understanding the organised crime group makeup and charging them with the conspiracy to steal, which actually then immediately sends it to Crown Court. And the Crown Court has greater sentencing powers. So we've seen this live in action now with a group of individuals who, over a period of 2 years, were responsible for £2.5 million worth of theft. 400 offences across 35 different forces, likely choking up the criminal justice system, 50 different officers in the case. By OPAL coming in now and seeing the totality of the crimes, those individuals received 2.5 and 3 years in prison and were deported back to their home country. And the next layer of that will be financial investigation to see what criminal assets we can take from them. The other element to that as well is now we're using powers which previously were kind of set aside for drug investigations and firearms investigations, so serious crime prevention orders. We've just secured our first serious crime prevention order on a retail organised crime group. And that prevents their offending and limits their ability to commit those offences by restricting their bank accounts, restricting their mobile telephone use. And then on top of that now, the financial investigation as well is account freezing orders that we're now using as a tactic to disrupt and displace the criminality. So the local criminal CBOs and local convictions is great, but actually from an organised crime point of view, we are now treating it as a serious threat rather than what perhaps years ago it was treated as, well, it's just shop theft or shoplifting. It's not. It's serious and organised crime.
Thank you.
Cola.
Is that having an effect? Is it working?
It is absolutely working, yeah. So in the 2 years that OPAL have been focusing on that, we've taken on 264 referrals. So whereas before, we'd have to go and look for those offences and make the links, well, shops can directly task us on a monthly basis and say, look, this is an organised crime group that's impacting on us. Of the 86 groups that we have taken on, we've identified 36 operations this year. We've reduced their offending by 73% of the groups that we've investigated. So we've disrupted that level of criminality, and in one case, as I've said, it disrupted almost by 100% a group that was responsible for £2.5 million worth of theft over 2 years.
The problem's getting worse.
It will continue. I don't think it'll be an overnight fix, but let's not forget there are different cohorts for different offences, and actually what we are seeing is two major retailers have said to us since they've been working with us, they have seen a distinct drop in organised criminality in their stores, which is great. And that feels like, for me, a benefit, because that's listening to our community. But you're absolutely right. If offences are increasing, it might be because of the other cohort of offenders.
And on that question, my question was to ask about whether local police forces take retail crime seriously enough. Edward and Andrew already answered that earlier, but Jim, what's your view about that?
I think they're getting better. I think there was some work to do, and Chief Constable Amanda Blakeman, who leads the volume crime portfolio, put in place the Retail Crime Action Plan, which was a reset, I think, for policing, to be a real clear set of guidelines as to what the police will and won't attend. Before, I think there was some mixed messages around the below £200 threshold, police won't attend, and so on. And as a result of that, I think our attendance has increased. If you listen to some of the retailers, they will be happier with the policing response now. It definitely will make an impact over a period of time, but bearing in mind it's been in place just over a year, and we need to see probably a longer term spread of the results.
I'm very sorry, but as you've heard, the bell is ringing. I understand it might be multiple votes, so we've taken the decision that rather than keeping you here waiting for what could be a significant period of time, we will close the session now, and perhaps if we can come back to you with write to you with other questions, or maybe we may be able to invite you back in the autumn, and hopefully we'll have business that goes on later than it is doing at the moment. But I'm afraid I'm going to have to bring it to a